And let me share the screen. Okay, today is July 13th, and this is a Velero community meeting, and we still have 10 members in Beijing, and from Velero. And first of all, let's do some status update. The Velero Beijing team is have primarily focused on the Copia integration design, and we have nearly finalized it. And the task has also been broke down, and issues has been assigned. And we can view all the issues from this link, and the issues have been tagged with Copia integration labels. And I think the PR is it's close to merge, and I believe that in most of the time the V 1.10 this PR or this design is open for discussion. So if we have anything or any questions or any suggestions after the issue is merged, I mean the PR is merged, we can open the discuss in any way, like from the Slack channel or from the GitHub issue or from this community meeting. Okay, then let's do some individual updates. So Daniel, please.
Yeah, I've been reviewing the design with the team and work with Yonghui to break down tasks for Copia integration. So like Yonghui mentioned, they're all done. So we have started working on the specific tasks. For me, I'll be updating the CRDs. It's like a top-down approach. From my side, I'll be working on the CRD changes, the controller changes, and do some refactor to make sure there is a possible to add a path for a Copia in addition to RESTIC. And after that, Yonghui and Ming will do some fundamental work and make sure there are the end-to-end flow works. And in addition to that, I have fixed a small issue with the 4.8.15. That's which line of the code in the plugin will throw this new pointer issue. So I just simply dump all this runtime frames in the log. So it doesn't look good, but it does help for debugging the issue to find out the problem in the plugin code. And in addition to that, I'm reviewing the data more related PRs by Shubham and Scott, and I will follow up with you guys later. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. For me, I'm also working on the Copia integration design and task breakdown. And these days I have also started some of the tasks. Yeah, so that's it. And Chuming?
Yeah, I'm working on integrating Copia uploader into Velero, which defines some interface, some options and policies and implements to do backup and restore. Yes, this is from my side.
Okay, thanks, Ming. And Xun?
I'm working on a PR to reduce the CRD size, as this mainly achieved by replace the policy spec in restore CRD with the generic object, and also working on reviewing VSL credential and atom action progress monitoring PR. And that's all.
Yes, I think this is this one, right? This is another large design, and we may have, some more time to review it, and if necessary, yeah.
And I was gonna say, I can give some background for kind of where that came from too, when you get to me.
Yeah, we may need some dedicated time for the discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's fine. And we can talk about it today, and if people want to look at it, basically, a couple of weeks ago, Shibam introduced a need that we had for Data Mover around what we were calling asynchronous plugin actions. And then we had some follow-on discussion on Slack to point out that there was a lot of overlap between that and Dave's design from quite a while back on the upload progress monitoring. And we looked at that and realized that the goals really were very similar. So we decided it made a lot of sense to try to integrate those two into a single kind of more flexible, and basically take Dave's design for upload progress monitoring for snapshots and kind of make it more general to apply to backup item actions and restored item actions as well, and try to kind of collect the combined needs in a single proposal with kind of a more general model. And that was the intent here. I basically took all of the content of Dave's design. I took Shubham's design that we had internally at Red Hat and tried to merge the set of requirements between both of them. And I want to basically get a single design that works for kind of all the use cases here. And this was kind of a first attempt at that. I noticed there was some feedback. I responded to some of that already, but I'm sure there's some more ongoing discussion needed. A couple of places where I pointed out that I needed to revise the design in response to some comments. I clarified some things in response to other comments. So we can talk about it more if there's specific questions tonight, or I can make some changes and we can talk about it at the next meeting. Either way is fine, or some combination.
Okay.
So essentially, you're proposing that we do not write a plugin as Dave suggested in his design. We do not use the item snapshot plugin. Instead, we use the existing BIA and RIA.
Basically, Dave proposed there were two things. He wanted to modify the volume snapshotter plugin specifically for the current volume snapshots to add that progress piece, and then he wanted to create a new plugin type for the item snapshotter. And my thinking, talking to Shubham and Dylan on our side, was that first of all, now that we have the plugin versioning API kind of in work for 110, it seemed to make more sense to, instead of creating two new plugin types, one for backups and one for restore, let's just do, because he already proposed modifying volume snapshotter to add a progress method. Let's do the same thing for backup item action and restore item action. Most plugins won't need that. That's fine. That can be a no op, it can do nothing, can return true, whatever. But this gives us the option to edit. The other advantage of using the existing plugin type is we don't have to add, because right now, for example, in backups, there's a section in the backup processing where we loop over all the backup item actions, call it, modify it, call down the chain, take the additional items, do all that. So if you introduce a new plugin type, we have to add another loop that duplicates all that logic. If we can just modify the interface to add the new method, now that we have the plugin versioning for 110, we can do that. We don't have to add a new place to hold this logic. And then we can handle everything else basically the same as, so the basic change from Dave's design is, instead of creating a new plugin type for what he was calling item snapshotter or snapshot item action, we're just going to modify backup item action to add an optional snapshot ID, or what we're calling an operation ID, because it's, again, more generalized than snapshots. For a snapshot, it will be a snapshot ID, but it could be something else. It's just a string that the plugin knows about. But we also want the same thing on the restore side, because from talking to Shubham and the data mover design he had in mind, we really need the same thing on the restore side. And that's one thing that was absent from Dave's design, is he was only talking about the backup. And whatever changes we make to backup item action, we want to make the same changes to restore item action, because for data mover and certain other plugin types, we may want that on the restore side as well. So, so the main advantages over Dave's proposal is we're not adding any new plugin types. We're making use of the plugin versioning API versioning, so that we can modify the existing backup item action and restore item action in kind of the same way that he was already modifying in his proposal, the volume snapshotter. I also want to call out, there were a couple of things that were commented on in the review to question, and this is one of Dave's original points where he was saying, because we go through at the end of the backup, for example, and then we go and we're in the kind of wait for snapshots phase. Dave's proposal had not writing the backup to object store until the backup was complete. And the question on the PR was, why don't we write it when we're done, and before we're waiting? And I actually kind of agree with that. I was hoping Dave could respond. I don't know how active he is now. I don't know if he's going to see this, but I think I'm kind of thinking the same thing. We get to a point at the end of the current backup processing where, again, we check for the backup item actions, all of these things we're waiting for. If it's done, we're done. We finish it, we're done, we go on. But if we're still waiting for these external snapshot uploads or item action operations, why don't we go ahead and write the backup at this point, everything that we know, and we're still in that waiting phase. That way, if something were to happen to the Velero process and it were to bounce, everything's in object store. We can recover, wait for results, and we don't lose anything. So I actually think that's a good suggestion. I'm just hoping to hear some feedback from Dave as to maybe he had some other reasons for not doing this in his proposal. That the other thing I haven't done yet, and I kind of need to do, is Dave had a draft PR where he implemented some of this. I need to look at that to see whether there were changes from his design to his draft PR to see if there's anything else that we need to incorporate into this, because obviously that'll have to be reworked as well.
I think the main reason delaying uploading the tarball is that he doesn't want the backup appear to be ready to use.
Yeah, so and I understand that.
Before the
I
data
guess,
move.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My concern is if we're at a point where we're already done with the backup, except for waiting, maybe we should write it, because that way, if something were to happen to the Velero process that were to bounce or whatever, we don't lose the whole thing, because at that point, everything's in object store. We're just waiting for, results. We should be able to recover at that point. So that might be something worth doing, because the backup state
you're
still
saying, yeah.
Because we hit a point where we already backed
I mean,
up.
you're suggesting that so you're suggesting that although the data movement may be failure, we cannot restore some particular PVs, but there are a lot of resources that have been backed up, so we should be able to restore them.
Let's be clear. Restore should still not be allowed until a backup is in a terminal state. Let's not change that. I think the question is, when we move from in progress to waiting for our actions, if we write everything to object store, then if the Velero pod were to restart for some reason, Velero can still recover from that, finish waiting for these actions, and everything's good. Because that's why it might make sense. And again, I was responding, I forget who had reviewed and commented that there was a suggestion as to why are we not writing this to backup? In other words, once Velero is going to the next backup, because that's the other part of the design from Dave had, is once a backup is done and we're just waiting for uploads or whatever, Velero can go to the next backup. At that point, I think before Velero goes to the next backup, it probably makes sense for Velero to write everything to object storage, so that there's not all this stuff in Valero's memory, just kind of at risk of a problem with the Velero server.
In that way, Scott, does it mean the backup has been uploaded, but before the data, the snapshot has been moved to, or
right?
So the looks like the backup should not be visible to users, because
right, exactly. It's not. In other words, the backup's not completed. I mean, if you actually do a Velero backup get, you'll see the backup is still in that waiting for upload state. But Velero already has the data, everything that it's going to write to object store. It should just write it there, because that way it's already in the object store. It doesn't mean that Velero is going to use it for a restore. It just means that once Velero is done with the backup, before it goes to the next, let's free up that memory in the Velero pod. It doesn't need to hold that in memory. It can just write it to the backup store before it starts the next backup. But no, the Velero backup status, the status.phase, is still not completed. So Velero knows that it's not done with uploading. It's got that point where it's still going to have to check those, volume snapshot and backup item actions to make sure they're complete. but
Yeah.
there's no reason to hold this, huge set of backups in memory and not write it to the object store. Let's just write it out while we have it. Let's free up the memory for the Velero, because that way when Velero starts the next backup, because that's another key part of Dave's design that I kept, was once the backup is done and all we're doing is waiting for snapshot uploads, for example, we can start the next backup now. But let's not hold this backup in memory, waiting to write it to object store. Let's write it out. Once we're done with that, we can check again to say, hey, is the uploads completed? If they're completed, we mark the backup as done and we move on. But if they're not completed, we keep it in that waiting for upload state, or kind of the more general new state name I had in the PR. And then that's something that Velero keeps checking, periodically. So once those uploads are completed or those other item actions are done, the backup moves to the completed state. And only at that point can we restore from it. So the restore logic will still never let Velero restore from a backup unless the backup is completed.
Yeah.
Because if the snapshots aren't uploaded, then we can't restore the backup.
Yeah, but I'm still. Yeah, so Scott and Shubham, I'm still a little curious. Like, so none of you or anyone from Red Hat was in the review of Dave's original upload.
No,
PR.
and that was part of that confusion, because because Dave's proposal was, we even called it snapshot upload progress monitoring. I didn't even think that it was to look at it as relevant. And when we had that conversation on Slack last week, I looked at it and I realized his proposal was probably 80% the same as Shubham's in terms of what they were wanting to add. So once I looked at that, I realized it really does make sense to make this one integrated thing and apply it both to snapshot uploads as well as these asynchronous actions that we're going to need for data mover. And once we have it, third-party plugins, for example, one of the plugins that we have for OpenShift for Red Hat is for copying internal images from our, and OpenShift has an internal Docker registry as part of the cluster. So we back up those images and restore those. That's something that we could also make use of this for plugin, design for, so that Docker image copy can happen in the background. And we could use this same design for that, in addition to data mover and snapshot upload.
Yeah, I'll take a closer look. And my concern is we may need to, because Dave has been quite inactive in the recent community meetings.
Oh,
so,
I understand.
Need to make decision without his.
That's fine too. I did ping him on the thing. If he's willing to, if he has time to respond, that's great. But like you said, he's not been active lately, and we may have to just make a decision. And if we need to change something, that's why I'm saying his design actually called for not uploading the backup until it was complete. And one of the reviewers questioned that, say, what, why do we need to wait? And I actually kind of agree with that. It's just that I was kind of taking Dave's design, but I actually want to revisit that. And I think it would be better to upload that, the backup to the object store as soon as we're done with Valero's done with it. If Dave can respond and he has a reason why we shouldn't do that, that's fine. If he doesn't respond and we, it works for us to change that, I mean, that's fine too. But the intent really is that this should completely basically replace both Dave's design that was already approved plus Shubham's design, which we hadn't submitted yet. And again, the other thing I need to do is I need to look at, because Dave had a draft PR with some of the implementation. I want to look at that to see if there were some changes between the design.
Actually, there has been,
I've seen that PR. I know it's there. I kind of intentionally want one of the original designs to be
my internet was bad, so I'm breaking up. But I just want to point out, there has been 1 or 2 PRs already merged to the main branch when they was implementing this upload progress monitoring in the 1718 time frame. If we decide to go the other way, we may need to.
I understand. I know there's one open PR that he had that's not merged yet. If you've seen a couple of PRs that are merged, if you could link them on my design PR, as I said, I need to look at anything that's been merged and anything that's been proposed to make sure that if I'm proposing something that we decide we need to change, we're fully aware of what the implications might be, including, if there's already code there that contradicts this, that's okay, as long as we agree we all want the change. We just need to make sure that we're aware, this is a change we need to make because it meets a larger use case, and we know that this is what has to change in the code base. And as I said, I know there's that draft PR that's not merged yet. I also want to look at that to see if there were any changes there from the design. But if there's anything already merged for this, I definitely want to see that. I mean, obviously, to either account for it or make a change or whatever. Because now that we can make changes to the plugin APIs, that's good. We have more flexibility, but let's make sure we're making the right set of changes the first time, because we want to make a V2, for these plugin APIs, but we don't want to have to then make a V3 because we got something wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll add comment later. Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add another thing. It's like, just as Shubham mentioned just now, this progress monitor should be very generic and work for every scenarios. Like, we have durable snapshot, we have non-durable snapshot, we have data mover, and right. And sometimes this may be dependent on users. For example, as a user, I have a AWS durable snapshot. I want to move it. I don't want to move it. So what I just want to mention that we need to make this this design very generic. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And that was the main goal of my PR, because Dave's PR was very kind of narrowed down on snapshot upload progress, and that's why I'm calling it kind of item action operation progress, because it might be a snapshot upload, it might be a data mover, but it also might be just some third-party plugin that says, hey, I need this action to happen in this external controller every time we do a backup, or this action to happen in this external controller every time we do a restore. And my plugin is going to initiate that action by creating some CR that some plugin some controller that's not Velero is going to grab onto and process. And then because we have this progress method, the plugin is responsible for when Velero at the end of the backup or restore calls this progress to say, hey, are you done yet? Gives it that string ID. That plugin can look up its own custom CR that it created, Velero knows nothing about, and say, oh, that's done now, respond. So yeah, that's exactly my goal, is that it needs to be generic. The early initial use case for this is, in fact, snapshot upload and data mover. But we want to make sure this works for really any backup item action, restore item action, or volume snapshot or plugin that has some operation that it wants to trigger during its execute phase, that's then going to continue in its own thread or its own process or its own pod. Then Velero needs to check back on at the end of the backup or restore to say, hey, are you done yet? That's the goal here.
Oh yeah. Okay. I think there should be more time for us to discuss this. And
feel free to comment on the PR, ping me in Slack, whatever, and we can talk about it again next meeting as well.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
And I will again look at Dave's PR and any PRs that Daniel or anyone else can point to me that were already merged to see if those PRs also might, suggest that I need to make some changes to the design to accommodate things there. Or if not, then we need to make note of when we implement this, we need to make some change to some existing code as a result of the change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Will do.
Okay, let's move on. And Danfeng, your update, please.
Okay, I'm working on migration in test, and I have passed the script on AWS and Azure provider, and I'm still working on vSphere environment. About this test case, currently I use 2 backup commands to backup the workload, the namespace, and cluster scope resource. I'm trying to find a way to combine these 2 commands in one backup command. Currently, I think I haven't found a good way to backup these 2 kind of resource in one backup command. That's all from my side.
Okay, thank you. And Scott, I think what we have just mentioned is what we want mentioned here, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the link to the PR that we were just talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and I just mention one other thing, not new work for me, but there were some additional comments on it that I responded to. The volume snapshot location credentials question, that PR is still out there. I do need to rebase it with the CRD changes, but if there's any questions there, I did want to clarify. I know this is something that Bridget started working on, and then as I understand it, it was a prioritization thing. The reason she pulled that out and didn't finish it wasn't that she thought it was a bad thing. It was that the business need for it was smaller. Back for BSLs, the notion of needing set of additional credentials for each location is obvious, because you might have 3 different BSLs all with different credentials. For volume snapshots, the usual use cases for a given provider, you're an AWS cluster, for example, you're only going to probably have 1 volume snapshot location with 1 set of credentials. But the reason why we still have customers that want that separate credentials is, one, your default credentials in that default location might be for your backup storage location, and so your volume snapshots might be with a different set of credentials. So the only way to do that right now without messing up your default BSL would be to set the credentials in the volume snapshot location. And the other reason why we want this is so that once users have gotten accustomed to not having to create those default credentials at Velero creation time, they only create those and add those for each BSL they create for backup storage locations, as this would allow them to use the same method for managing their volume snapshot locations, again, only adding the credentials when they create the VSL. So for example, for a user that say normally uses Menio for their object storage, they already have that in their credentials, and then now they want to start using snapshots. They're in an AWS cluster, they create a VSL with their Amazon region for that. They want to just add the credentials right there without having to mess with the default credentials or mounted secrets or any of that. So that's kind of the main thinking behind why we want to add the same credentials to the volume snapshot locations that we already have for backup storage locations. It's kind of more of a consistent user experience around managing credentials. And in fact, the AWS provider, the plugin already supports using those. We still need to add that for Azure and GCP, but AWS already supports looking at those credentials from the VSL.
Yeah, but I see Bridget mentioned in a comment saying that most cloud providers do not support you do a snapshot using a different credential. I'm a little confused. Maybe we can clarify in the comment section of your PR stuff.
And I did respond to that. That was what I would just say just now. And I think she's correct in the sense that you're not going to need to create 2 different volume snapshot locations with different credentials. But it's certainly possible right now to have a volume snapshot location for using 1 set of credentials for your snapshots, and to have a different set of credentials for your S3 object store that you're using, because every S3 bucket you create might have its own credentials. So even right now, in other words, you might not have 3 different volume snapshot locations with different sets of credentials, like you might with backup storage locations. At the same time, you might be using your default credentials because right now, Valero's notion of the default credentials location is the same for volume snapshot locations and backup storage locations. But if your backup storage locations are, in some third-party S3 store and not AWS, like say Menio or Nuba, and if that's what your default credential secret is pointing to, and then you want to start using snapshots. If you can just add those credentials to your volume snapshot location, your AWS credentials, because those Nuba credentials are obviously not going to be valid for AWS snapshots. So in other words, I took Bridget's comment as not doing this as a bad thing, but if you want to pick one area that's more important, the backup storage location credentials certainly were more important because it's possible in the same cluster to use multiple sets of credentials for backup storage locations. You're not going to use multiple sets for volume snapshots, but you might still use a different set than the default. So you still need this if the only volume snapshot credentials you need are different from your backup storage location default. Because say, if you've already, centered your Velero install around using Minio, for example, because, this is your local object store, but you happen to have an AWS cluster and you have an Azure cluster. And so those different clusters have to use different credentials for their volume snapshots. So maybe your default credentials are set up around your, internal, your local, object store, but those volume snapshot locations have to be geared towards the specific location of your cluster. So that's a use case. In other words, this isn't something that you absolutely have to back things up, but having this makes it convenient to manage your credentials in the same way for volume snapshots as for backup storage. It doesn't require you to change your default credentials based on where your local cluster is, for example. It lets you decide at the point you create those snapshot locations, add the credentials in, just like we're doing with volume snapshot, with backup storage locations. So I kind of understood Bridget's comments as saying, look, we have limited resources for this release. We don't have time to get volume snapshots in. We're just going to do the backup storage location because that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the bigger pain point. But as I understand, talking to Dylan, we've got customers with OADP and Red Hat where they want to be able to manage the volume snapshots in the same way. So I just kind of revised, kind of put back some of what was originally there with the CRD changes for the VSLs, and then adding the kind of controller logic changes needed to support that. And again, we already have that support in the AWS plugin. We just need to, in addition to that current OpenPR that I do need to rebase because of CRD changes for that CRD file, we will also, once that's merged, need to add support for GCP and Azure plugins, because right now AWS plugin already supports this. It actually, with the changes to Velero in my PR, this actually works, in an AWS cluster environment without any changes to that plugin, because that plugin already supports looking for credentials there. We would need to make the same changes to Azure and GCP.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I think Daniel may have some problem with his network. So one simple question from me is like, so is this VSL change in the same PR here?
Oh, no, it's totally different. The PR is already out there. If you look at open PRs and filter by my name, you should see another one. I should link it in here. But if you look at what's open on Velero right now, I can put it here and find the link.
Okay, Xun, I think you are also reviewing this PR, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay, then I think we can have more discussion offline for this PR also.
Yeah, I will update the meeting notes to link to that under my status report, because I just found it again.
Okay.
That way, if you can look it up there, but I'll link it there.
Okay. Let's move on. And Winken, your update, please.
Okay, I'm working on the item to just the package structure for REST. This is part of the API integration. And first I need to point out is we found the issue in 1.9. The BSL validation logic has some bug, and I have submit fix, and the fix have been merged to Boostman and 1.9 branch.
Okay. Thank you. And then let's move on to the discussion section. First of all, it's a very simple question. So for the CoPI integration design, do we have any pending questions before it is merged? I think especially for Scott and Shubham, do you have any pending questions?
I don't at the moment. I'll look at it again, but right now I know I have looked at it before, and I think I don't have any current additional questions on that.
Okay, and for the state, yeah.
I'll take a look at it once. I don't have any pending questions though, but yeah, I'll take a final look.
Okay, thank you. And the status of the PR, it's so I think Daniel has been has proved that, and so Scott and Shubham, if you please further review it, and if there is no more questions, Scott, please help to approve that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll have a look at it tomorrow, and then I'll get some feedback, either feedback or approval if I don't have any additional questions.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, let me check. I think Daniel is not here.
Daniel has some problem. His net with his network, he cannot connect to the global proxy. So yeah, he just let me help to ask the he asked the question he put in the discussion topic. Yeah, so I think Daniel want to confirm if we have any other questions or concern for the 1.10 plan. So I'm not sure, Scott or Shubham, have you already take a look to that plan of 1.10?
Yeah, I'll have to look at it again. I know we actually had some conversation with Dylan actually today, because we actually have an OADP group kind of in-person meetup this week, so kind of we're all in Raleigh this week, and we'll have some. I'll talk to Dylan again tomorrow to see if there's any additional comments he had, because I know we had some discussions around that, but I don't know if we got up to a point of any kind of final resolution there today.
Okay, good. So please take a look to that. If anything,
yep,
need to to follow up, please discuss with us. Okay. Yeah. Also, Daniel put another comments in that section. We have some organization restructuring in the company. So some of the team will take some more responsibility in the for the companies. But we are still working on the Velero project. That is not change. Yeah.
I had a quick question. The question from a GA question. I noticed that we had the issue with the BSL validation kind of with 1.9. There's a kind of continuous validation instead of the 1 minute delays. That was cherry picked to the 1.9 branch. Is the intent to release a 1.9.1 with that fix? And if so, what's the timing around that?
Yeah, we previously have some discussion on that patch release. We want to see if there are any more issue found in the community. Yeah. So if we may plan to work on this patch release, start from the end of this month. So maybe in next month we can release that patch.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Scott. So I think that's the topic Daniel want to discuss.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And the next one is from Xun. Xun, please share us.
Okay, that's the task I'm working on to reduce the CRD size. Because I modify the restore CRD and remove the pod spec from it. The pod spec is used for the init hook for restore. I'm not sure whether there is any user or developer who depends on this pod spec change. So I want to make sure this change will not impact anyone.
Yeah, I'm not aware of using it in particular. Do you know where someone would be using it? I mean, I'm not really sure kind of how that fits into the restore, just because that's not something I've interacted with directly.
You mean the pod spec? What is useful in the restore?
Right. In other words, yeah, I don't know that I've ever interacted with restore in a way that had to mess with that. So I'm not familiar with the need there. So I don't really know what that's used for, and so it's hard for me to say, who might need it, because I haven't seen the need for it. But I don't really know where it would fit in, where it would be useful. In other words, what functionality are we losing by getting rid of it?
Basically, I think no functionality losing because I use the preserve unknown field to let the controller or the Kube API server to keep all the field unknown in the init container area field, and I think other things should work as same. Just there is no such detailed definition in the CRD of restore. So I think except the CRD definition YAML file and logic, but the Velero working logic and code hasn't changed much from that. And talking about the pod spec, it is used for the hook in the restore, because in restore process, there is possibility that when trying to run some hooks before the restore or the pod started, we need to use something like init container. So there is a definition in the restore to do that, to run some command in the init container before the restore started in the pod. That's my understanding of that. Okay, if that's not clear enough, I maybe will write some message in the Slack to declare or clarify that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not sure. As I said, I don't think we have any use on the Red Hat side where we've done much with that directly. Shiba might have some different recollection, but it doesn't sound to me like there's anything on our side where this would impact us. But it's just not obvious to me if there was a problem, like how users would see it, when they would see it, and all that.
Okay. I think thanks. I will write something more detailed in the Slack and to light other developer and users to make sure that too.
Okay. Thanks, Xun. Maybe we have the details in the Slack, and anyone else could think that for a while and to see if there are any unseen problem. Yeah, thanks. And the next one is from Johnny. Johnny, please.
Yeah, that's a item regarding the community meeting time. I think Arnie had already created a discussion topic for this weeks ago. So please take a look at that. And I think what we are trying to resolve is previously we have two different series community meeting for about 4, at least 3-4 time zone, right? So it put some challenge. Sometimes people could not join. I think there is not a perfect way for us to have a single meeting to meet together. So we only actually put 2 proposals here. One is to combine all the session into a single community meeting series, but that makes difficult for like Beijing folks to join. I think it is too late. Once daylight saving switch again, it will to 23, right? It's too late for us. So the another option is still keep 2 session, but each session will be the bi-weekly. Why change it to bi-weekly is because previously we have first or third week of month for one series, another 2, the second and the fourth week for another time zone series. But that will face a problem if the first week is start from Wednesday, so we will have 2 community meetings in 1 week in the second week. So we may think change to bi-weekly will keep things simple. So that's the idea here. So I think please take a look at that. And
I was going to say too. Again, I think it's become pretty clear that there's not one time that works every week for everybody. I think the other problem is that, like right now, for example, we have the 2 meetings. The meeting that's noon U.S. Eastern time is very convenient for me, but pretty much impossible for Beijing. But then the Beijing-centric time is convenient for you, and still possible for me. It's not perfect, but it works. And I'm thinking maybe it makes sense to take the US-centric time and make it like, say, 2 hours earlier. That way, it's the Beijing team may not come every time, but if it's at 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. instead of midnight, if you need to come a particular week for that meeting, you can. Whereas right now it's pretty much impossible for that week. So that would make it slightly easier for the Beijing people to come for those alternate, US-centric weeks. But it's not so early that it's impossible, because we also have it's a little bit different now because Dave is not actively joining all the time like he was before, because he's in California, which is 3 hours earlier than here. So if we were to make the US-centric meeting 2 hours earlier than it currently is, it would be at 9 o'clock, or say 10 o'clock for me, and then 7 a.m. for him, which is, again, not perfect, but he could do it if he needed to join. But for Dave and for Fong, who's also on the US West Coast, this current time slot's actually better, because this is late afternoon for them.
Understood.
So basically keeping the Beijing-centric time zone meeting as it is, because I think that's probably the best combination that allows both groups to meet at the same time. But for the US-centric meetings, if we move it at, say, 2 hours earlier, that would allow people in Beijing to join if they needed to. It wouldn't be convenient, but it would be possible, if there was an exception where, you wanted to join for a particular topic.
Okay.
You wouldn't be expected to be there every time, but at least it would be possible to join when you wanted to.
Okay, so
I don't know that it makes sense to do the bi-weekly. I still think 1 meeting a week is still probably better, because I think if we do 2 a week where we're meeting at different times, that's going to be harder for people to schedule around, just because I don't know that we need that many meetings.
Bi-weekly is for each session, right? So we will still keep every week we have a community meeting, either in US Central Time Zone or in Beijing Time Zone.
And I guess just thinking in terms of my own participation, for example, if I know that I've got a nighttime meeting twice a month and a daytime meeting twice a month, I can most months manage to make all of them. But if it's a nighttime meeting every Tuesday, I'm going to miss more of them. but there's more often we have meetings, so that may be okay. In other words, right now, when we alternate twice a month, this time and then that time, each week one meeting, most months I can come to all 4 meetings. If we do 2 meetings a week, where there's once every week where it's in the evening for me, I'm probably not going to make all 4 of them. But that may be fine, just because it's easy enough to schedule, block out that evening twice a month for me, but it's not during normal working hours, so it's probably not something I'd be able to do every single week.
Okay, so you think still keep?
So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking keep the same first, third, second, fourth, and we do. You're right. We do need to figure out a way to schedule it so that when the first of the month is a Wednesday, we don't have this, because there may be a way of doing that with Google and time zones to sort of fix that, or even do the one-off change like we did last month, where we just move the meetings. You're right. It makes no sense to have back-to-back meetings one week and then no meeting the next week. But that's kind of a calendar problem rather than a scheduling problem. I mean, we need to figure it out. But I think 1 meeting a week is probably still the appropriate frequency. I think having 2 meetings a week. And you're going to have people choosing which meetings they go to, and it's going to be harder to get everybody together at one time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it might make sense to move that US-centric meeting time a couple hours earlier. I'd like to hear some feedback from people on the West Coast. The only people I think that regularly attend from that time zone now would be Fong and sometimes Dave. I'd like to hear their feedback on this. If they have any, if they don't have any feedback, that may mean that they're not going to be participating enough to warrant, needing to worry about it. But again, I think for the US West Coast people, the current time slot, which is Beijing morning, is probably the best time for them anyway, because it's, it's like 4 or 5 p.m. depending on daylight savings versus winter time for them. And so, right. Again, my thinking is that we can't make one time that's convenient for everybody every week. But if we can make it where twice a month it's convenient for you, and twice a month it's only slightly inconvenient for you, that's better than having twice a month where you can't come.
Yeah, that will be better, right? I think.
Yeah, because that way there's twice a month that you can know you'll be there every time, and twice a month, if you need to be there, if there's something you want to discuss, if you want to, make an effort, you can do it. Yeah. But there's no expectation you have to be there, but you have the option. Whereas right now, twice a month, the Beijing team pretty much can't be there because it's midnight. That's not reasonable.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So would you also do me a favor in the next US Central Community meeting? Can you bring out this?
Yes. Yeah, and Orlin will be there as well, because and again, right now that's the issue. Right now is that this time slot, Orlin can't come because it's 3 a.m. Where he is in Bulgaria. So we still have to have one meeting twice a month. That's a time slot that he can participate in, and that the moving of the US centric one 2 hours earlier would be perfectly fine for him, because that puts it closer to the middle of his day anyway.
Yeah, I also think so. Yeah, so maybe that is a better choice. I think your proposal maybe is still the better choice. Yeah, so let's get the other maintainer or other folks to feedback on this. So
yeah, and if anybody else wants to comment, I actually have already commented on that discussion with the same thing I just suggested here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of recorded there. But yeah, we should definitely bring it up when Orlin's here, and maybe some of the other people are on the call next time.
Okay, good. Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
Okay, Yonghui.
Yeah, thanks, Jolly. And I think we have done today's meeting. And thank you for your time, everyone. And have a good day and night.
Thank you, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.